Okay, shall we start? Hi, everybody. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Fabio Chiusi. I'll be moderating this interview with Nathan Jurgensen. He's a sociologist, he's a media theorist, one that I appreciate a lot for what it matters. He's a creator of a conference, an annual conference called Theorizing the Web. This is very good, and it's about to happen in a couple of weeks, if I got it right. Yeah, and you should check it out. It's really, really good on these issues. Where?
New York City.
New York City.
Yeah. So come out.
And he is the founder of a website, I would call it web magazine or something. Yeah, Real Life, which is an interesting twist to it, and I think we will understand why. And he's a researcher at Snap Inc., and he has a forthcoming book for Verso Books called The Social Photo, if I get it right. Yeah, and I'd like to start exactly from there. I'm a big, huge Black Mirror fan, and I'm a lot into the Waldo episode, as you may be familiar with that, in which a fake puppet, digital puppet, manages to get almost elected in Britain, I think in a local election, but then the episode points at something bigger going on there, in a kind of totalitarian fashion, and because of this fake puppet orchestrating and manipulating the minds of electors, and it's kind of what's happening and what we've been discussing more than happening in the last couple of years, in which fakery apparently magically invaded us, and conquered the world. And through fakery, we have like these populist movements all over the place, and we have Russian trolls, and we have bots all over the place, and everything, and fake news. So the first thing I would like to ask to Nathan is the world having its Waldo moment, and meaning, are we so obsessed with fakery, and has it got something to it, or is it just a fake?
Yeah. Can everybody hear me? Microphone's working? All right. I think Black Mirror is a good place to start. It's hard for me because I haven't seen a whole lot of the show, so I should confess that. But I do think it's kind of the tone of where a lot of conversations about the internet, including ones happening at this conference, are, which is kind of dystopic. It's kind of hyperbolic. And as an antidote to conversations about technology and the web maybe 5 years ago, which were very utopian and hyperbolic in the same way. And in the United States, at least, most conversations about the internet or technology have to be put through the lens of, is it good or bad? Which is about the dumbest question you can ask of the internet, is it good or bad, when it's obviously both. It's how we speak to each other. It's how we present ourselves. It's how we get news. Is talking good or bad? Is identity good or bad? I think that's an incomprehensible question that we put to technology and social media all the time. The question is, how is a specific platform or device designed? Is that useful or not? To whom and when? And it really means talking about the specific design decisions and how they impact different people differently. That's a very nuanced conversation. It's a little bit boring. It's not as much fun as Black Mirror, where everything, it's going to be the end of the world or it's going to be utopia. But I think anytime you see that impulse to take a conversation that should be nuanced, should be talking about local, cultural situations that are different from place to place and for person to person, that have to do with power, that have to do with vulnerability, and somebody says that it's blanket good or bad, don't listen to that person. That person doesn't know what they're talking about. That, I think, is a very immature conversation about the web, and I think the impulse to kind of say, this is like Black Mirror all the time, it's become a habit, really betrays how immature our understanding of the internet is. And I hope we can get kind of past the sort of dystopian and utopian framework for talking about anything. But you also were talking about the kind of obsession with fakeness right now. Did you want to? Exactly. Should we talk about that a little?
Sure.
I mean, I think that's kind of that's the biggest meme right now. Is at least from my perspective, is this obsession with fakeness. It could be fake news. It could be. Do people know deep fakes? This is basically like Photoshop, but for video, where you can edit video to make it look like I'm saying something that I'm not. You can, there's kind of, audio, same thing. There's, Adobe is making the Photoshop for audio, where you can take a voice and make it say things that the person didn't say. I think there's a lot of worries about augmented reality. Everyone is, going to leave this world and instead, use augmented reality to make it different. It's a, leaving reality, virtual reality, Ready Player One, big movie, that we're all going to leave reality to go into the virtual. So I'm hearing a lot about fakeness right now. I think that's a big obsession. And I think it's a little bit overblown. I think it's a little bit in that same utopian, dystopian dualism that's not useful. To go back a little bit, the condition of augmented reality. So let's think about augmented reality. How technology and information changes and mediates and structures how you perceive the world, how you understand yourself, how you understand other people. That's augmented reality, and obviously goes back long before the smartphone. This room is an augmented reality. I'm sitting this way, you're sitting that way. That affords me a lot of power to talk, and then you're listening. So architecture is an augmented reality. How you plan a city augments the reality, changes how you think, what you can think. Language is itself a technology that structures how you think, what you can think. And so if you take a bigger view of technology, of information, boy, when you're driving down the road, you have so many, that reality is being augmented in so many ways, by the radio, by the billboards, by the traffic signs. We're very used to our reality being augmented. There's no real, pure, offline, unmediated, unaugmented reality. That doesn't exist. That is something that's a fiction that we are nostalgic for. I think it's modernity. It's the Enlightenment that produces this epistemic preoccupation or worry that's as older than any of these buildings. And it's not new. People have complained about media and information confusing the world and the loss of truth for as long as we have had mass media. That's what the Enlightenment is, right? The Enlightenment is, instead of truth being dictated, truth needs to be discovered. That we can find something out, and we could take truths and throw them away and find new ones, right? And I think people have talked about our current moment as post-truth or post-enlightenment, and the Enlightenment is epistemic despair, right? You don't have a book or an institution telling you what is right and wrong, true and false, that it's actually up for debate and has to be discovered. And so for the entire history of modernity, we've been in the situation of not knowing and debating what is true, what is real. And every new media that comes up is an opportunity to start that debate again. And so you can read history books from the 1920s, the 1950s, the 1970s, and they all complained about the exact same things, that information is expanding too fast, it's chaos, the media, mass media is making everybody stupid. These complaints are old. Everyone is born into the condition of thinking that the world before they were born was too slow, probably when they were born was just right. And in the future, it's too fast, and everything's going to be chaos, and it's going to be dystopia, and we're going to, I've heard this at the conference a lot, that we're entering into the end of democracy, the end of humanity, the end of knowledge, the end of human discourse, that we're not going to talk to, like, the very fabric of culture is being torn apart by, what essentially is, like video shop. Like Photoshop happened, we dealt with it. And I think we're going to do the same with new technologies. I don't think we're not going to enter into an era of truth, because that era never happened. That's nostalgia. I think post-truth is just another name for saying modernity, and we've been there for a long time. Sorry, that was a rant.
A rant, I absolutely
These are all the
agree
things
with.
I'm thinking of when I'm sitting when I'm watching other panels, and I hope I get to say that. Yeah.
You get to say that now. Talking again about this obsession with social media, Isn't it the case that it is an instance of what you call digital dualism, this obsession, meaning that the virtual and the real are two separate entities, and the virtual has some kind of superpowers over the real, exactly because it is different than the real. For example, you can do micro-targeting, political ads, which you can't do in the real life, for example. And that's the first point. The second is, isn't it the case that this obsession leads us to some kind of data reductionism, meaning that it is data that win election, not politics, not something else, not racism, not things that are outside of the virtual. And if yes to both questions, then where does it lead us? Where are we being led, like theoretically?
Yeah, it's amazing how technology is, it's either the demon or it's the savior. Kind of similar to what I was saying before. Digital dualism. This is when I first started studying the internet, so I'm a sociologist, and when I was first a graduate student, think about 2008, 2009, at the time it was much more in vogue to talk about the internet as a cyberspace, as a virtual world. And I was really, as I'm starting my graduate studies, I was thinking this is all wrong. I always talk about the internet as it is real life. It comprises real people with real vulnerabilities and emotions and politics. It's never devoid. Sometimes platforms like to pretend that they are devoid of politics or interests. It's never that. And at the same time, this is virtual to a large degree. This is mediated by technology, by information. I know people in this room only through the internet. The internet has everything to do with this, even when I'm not holding a screen. So I don't like that clean distinction between online, offline, as if digitality is some kind of a light switch. It's much more of a continuum. So I call this digital dualism, this idea that there's the real world and the virtual world. Think of The Matrix. Or Tron, or Hackers, or all those movies. I always like the movie Videodrome, and if you haven't seen it, it's about a person who becomes augmented by information. Their body and information start to merge and become one. It's a horror film. But I think it's much more in line with how, at least I understand the internet and digitality. And so that's kind of the idea behind digital dualism, and applied to some of the topics of this conference. People are talking about elections. I'm from America, and Donald Trump, a lot of the blame for the Donald Trump election has been placed on data targeting and things like that, and people want to blame Facebook. And I really love that we're having those conversations. The politics of data is a very important and underdone conversation. I'm glad we're starting to do it. But I think you were alluding to, there's an elephant in the room when it comes to the election of Donald Trump. You can explain the election of Donald Trump very, very simply with one variable, and we are obsessed with the margins, and the one variable is racism. I mean, he's an explicit racist, and America's a pretty racist country, and he won. He said, I'm selling racism, and people said I'd like that. Like, it's a pretty, it's weird being at events like this because we have an interest in journalism and people want to think about these minor questions, but it's, why aren't we just talking about racism? Why are we obsessed with all these sort of minor variables? That said, I'm also interested in those minor variables. I'm interested in, treating Facebook, treating all platforms, including the platform I work at, treating these conversations much more like adults. And I think there's a legitimacy. So I was asked right before this for the camera, has what's happening with Facebook right now delegitimized social media? And it's certainly, I think it's in the air. Every day, people are much more critical of data and information and privacy, information flows, algorithms. Yay, right? Like this is, sociologists and many other critical thinkers of the internet are like, I told you so. We've been saying this for a decade. But that said, I think it also legitimizes social media because now we're having an adult conversation. Maybe not so much the American senators. They don't seem to know anything about Facebook. That wasn't a very adult conversation, but we're getting there. And I think we're starting to understand technology and platforms as not over and above real life, but as part of it. And when something is real, that means it's going to be boring. It's going to be sometimes sad and bad. It's going to be regulated. It has to go through laws. Like, these are just adult conversations that we haven't had about social media. And it's long overdue to treat these things as real.
Absolutely. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that this proposed scandal, Cambridge Analytica scandal, is the result of actually an ideological failure on the part of Facebook. What became apparent, and what actually Zuckerberg himself argued, is that, well, we were an idealistic and an optimistic company. We just wanted to focus on the good that brings about, the fact that we're connecting every other person in the world. So this is.
Can we talk about the
absolutely.
idealistic?
That was my question. And but it has a larger point to it. I think what is becoming apparent is that this kind of utopian ideological substrate to the whole Silicon Valley enterprise is crashing down, and I think that leads to it may make it easier, if framed in the right way, to actually talk in a cyber realist perspective, without utopia, without dystopia, and that would be absolutely great. We've all been writing about it like for the last 10 years or something. We definitely need to get out of the opposition. But do you think this is going to happen? Is the king finally naked? We can go on.
I mean, I think it's absolutely amazing that you would describe as idealistic, not having an ideology. And I think that was Facebook's politics. That was their ideology, was that they lacked a politics, that they lacked an ideology. That was always their line in the news. They would say, they would describe Facebook as an empty vessel, the perfect empty vessel. That's how one of their lead designers described it. They would often say, we don't create the news feed, you create the news feed. And there was an objectivity, because we work with numbers. It's algorithms, it's numbers, it's it's not, there was a famous article in Wired magazine called The End of Theory, that when you're dealing with big data, if your data is so big, then you can be over and above politics. You can be over and above ideology. We don't need theories. We don't need that.
Chris Anderson.
That was Chris Anderson.
Yes.
And which was stupid. I mean, there's no such thing as not having politics. There's no such thing as not having interests. And the failure to recognize yourself as having politics is itself its own kind of politics. This false neutrality, this false objectivity, which has a very long history. Philosophers of science in here would talk about positivism. We could talk about empiricism and sort of the long history of claims to neutrality that always, in retrospect, in hindsight, people who think they are above politics are shown to have politics because they end up doing things that benefit them, right? And just as Facebook, just as the platforms Silicon Valley in general didn't want to own up to their own politics, because if you say you have politics, well, now you are a platform for a subset of users. And the idea is we want everybody in the world. So Facebook calls the 2 billion users a community. And I think I'm not the first
ideology.
person. Yeah,
that's ideology. Yeah, to me at least.
No such thing as a community of 2 billion people.
Yeah.
A community is a group of people with vested interests, right? And they're working together because they share something. And there's nothing that 2 billion Facebook users have in common other than that they use Facebook. And to say community is to eliminate, to disappear, to hide all the different interests, all the different politics, all the different vulnerabilities that each group, every person using the site has. That said, I feel like they have started, to their credit, have changed their view on that and are starting to walk back some of those comments. And we'll see. I mean, this is why they didn't have human beings empowered to sort the news, right? Because the moment, they had some people, they had some human beings that were contractors. These were low-level jobs, and even they got fired the moment somebody in the far right in the United States said, well, there's not enough far-right news, and their response was to fire all the humans and just let algorithms do it, and now they're hiring people. It's a big mess. And, what they seem reluctant to do is hire people, journalists, that have a background in journalistic ethics and standards, and say, this is Facebook's take on the news. Here's what our journalist said. Critique us, if you will, or say that we did a good job. I mean, having a viewpoint is what people who sort the news, it's a journalistic project. Facebook always says we're not journalists. We're this empty vessel. We're the container. We're the platform. If you are sorting the news, you are doing the work of an editor. If you're editing news, you are working in the field of journalism. And it's as simple as that. So hire people that do that, have a viewpoint, stand by it. If it's good, people will congratulate you for that. Some people will not like it. And I just think that's just the obvious direction this needs to go. And Facebook has tried not to do that for so long that it's gotten them into this mess. So, full disclosure, so I work for Snapchat, Snap Inc. It's probably not well known. It's not very well known in Italy. And we have journalists. We hire journalists, and, when a news event happens, we have a map and people put things, we sort it. We're doing the work of adding some snaps, taking out others. That's editing. That's the work of journalists. You hire journalists to do that, and put contextual information, verify things, remove things that aren't verified. Just the mundane work of journalism, and you can, it's a viewpoint, and we have a viewpoint, and you can like it or not like it, but we have one, and I just think that seems to be the obvious direction that things need to go.
Yeah, and yet yesterday in the testimony, Zuckerberg repeated the word AI 30 times or something, and the whole perspective is to gain at the same time a broader responsibility over content, but that broader responsibility is actually of algorithms that will be sorting out that content in the future, at least in the imaginable future. So again, this has to be this seems to me a shift back to the old way of becoming the empty vessel,
And
it's algorithms.
AI was also the answer to, I don't know if people remember a year ago, Zuckerberg wrote that 6,000 word
manifesto,
read like a undergrad essay, and it was all about AI, that Facebook should be sort of the social infrastructure for the world, and that infrastructure is going to run on AI. Exactly. And it's the idea that if you have enough data, then things will go smoothly. I mean, this was right after Brexit and Donald Trump, and I think Facebook was selling itself as the last successful working global institution. A year later, that doesn't read well at all, but that was the idea then. It still is the idea now that with enough data, we can run the world. That data should replace elected officials. Nobody says that out loud, but that's literally what that means. There's no elected officials in tech platforms, and if they are the social infrastructure and they're using AI, they're saying data should replace elections. And I think that there was a Facebook Q&A with Stephen Hawking, and Mark Zuckerberg got in there and asked a question to Stephen Hawking, and Zuckerberg said that he believes that all of human behavior is explainable or describable by numbers, by math. That you could have, you can look it up. You can find the exact quote. I can't remember the exact quote. You're a journalist. You'll fact check me. And so this is part of it. He believes that, and I think this is the computer science engineer Silicon Valley mindset, that really all of this is, if you have enough data and you get the right algorithm, you can understand this and you can govern this. And I find that to be, the most terrifying description of identity, of intimacy, of family, of all the things that we do via a screen are describable and rankable and governable by numbers, by AI, by algorithms. And I think that's a extremely foreign and radical not just view, but politics, to bring it back. Yes. That's politics. That is a politics to understand humanity as, rankable, to put numbers on everything, scores on everything, to run things.
Chinese politics. actually. Yeah.
It's
Something like that.
it's at least politics.
Yeah.
You know, I personally think that's sad. If you think that's great, whatever. Like, but let's acknowledge that it's a certain kind of politics. It's a certain kind of politics to rank the news feed by what's most likely to engage you, to make you click, right? Like, that's a certain view of how information should be ordered. And that's an ideology. It's not idealistic, it's an ideology. And it's not just tech platforms that have that ideology. I mean, I think they learned from journalistic outfits as well. I don't think many of the things we complain about Facebook, they seem similar to what I see on, let's say, CNN, where information is more about what will get engagement than what will inform. That isn't new to social media. So I'm a child of the Iraq War, the 2003 American invasion of Iraq. And, so I saw a massive fake news story, right? A massive media manipulation machine put to work to the invasion of a country on false pretenses that led to hundreds of thousands of people dying in a globally understood mistake or murderous illegal war, right? Like, I mean, that was only 15 years ago. And so the idea that we're now entering into a post-truth world because we don't like the memes, when we're just 15 years out of media manipulation leading to hundreds of thousands of deaths, I do feel like we are sort of overstating the problem of today. All the regulation we want Facebook to have existed in that moment. For the New York Times, for the CNN, for ABC, NBC, the advertisements on those channels, they were well regulated, and they helped bring about a war under false pretenses. I can't get that out of my mind when I think about we've now entered into a post-truth. Like, the truth era was the era where my country invaded Iraq. I don't buy it.
So even the legalistic environment we have now, that we need regulation, it can be another fake utopia and turn out to be not enough to actually regulate and have only truthful sentences, claims, and articles. And another thing I would like to ask you, since you're really into identity and philosophy, I was curious to know. It's something that never shows up in debates around manipulation. What is it that this environment and these new techniques of manipulation are doing to our identity, if they're doing anything at all? Do studies exist on this?
With respect to news consumption?
To news consumption, to I don't know, being constant in touch with bots, for example.
Yeah,
we even, and I think you don't know it, and most of the audience don't know it. But Matteo Salvini, the Lega Nord leader, had used an app called Lega Nord Illustrator that actually, when you sign in, you hand in the keys of your social media accounts. And whenever the central of propaganda, decides, you actually become a bot retweeting or tweeting those exact content, like, storm-like, like tweet storm-like. I mean, and that led some researchers to call them augmented humans, because you don't really know what you're dealing with anymore. Are you dealing with a human bot, a bot human? It's becoming a bit. So I wonder whether there was some higher level reflection on this.
Yeah, I think there's a sense that, this is the magic bullet theory of media, that, if all this bad false information is kind of brainwashing people, leading to Brexit and Donald Trump and the rest. If you see enough bots, if you see enough Russian things, it's always a little xenophobic. It's always Russians and China. I think what we're coming to terms with is we just now see how, it's like there's so many conspiracy theories today, right? Everyone's a conspiracy theorist and everyone's, getting this bad information, sharing bad information. I think we just now see the normal consumption of news, right? Most people aren't journalists. Most people don't have, the journalist epistemology, way of knowing and justifying truth is one that I hold as well. Fact plus fact equals truth. Right? The truth of the world is a collection of verifiable facts, right? That's what journalists think. Most journalists actually never live up to that standard. I don't live up to that standard. Nobody lives up to that standard. That's actually a very rare way of knowing the world. Most people get information from their friends. You go to the bar and you have a conversation and everybody talks, and there's basic truths. This idea that, you see all the people online sharing all these conspiracy theories, that was really common. We just didn't see it before. We now have the evidence of how most people don't have the kind of journalist way of knowing. We now have evidence of that, and it's getting thrown in our faces all the time, and we see that. I don't think it's that much different from how people have always come to know the news, which isn't newspapers, right? There wasn't this world where everyone was reading the newspaper front to back. Is you were talking with your friends, you were talking with your family, and that is the most convincing way. When somebody convinces you of a fact or an argument, it's usually because you know them, you're invested in your relationship with them. That's how it's not this pure logic deduction. I've out-logicked your logic, and now you believe me. That doesn't really happen. And so I think we're seeing more evidence of how news and information work. And, Stephen Colbert had that great phrase, truthiness. Does everybody know truthiness? And this is kind of like you have a truth in your mind, and you use facts to support that truth. Like you believe it already, and then you just find evidence in the world.
Verificationism.
I like that. Yeah, I like that. I like that. This is, in Obama, in America. So Donald Trump started his political career by saying Barack Obama wasn't an actual U.S. citizen. It was racist. And the fact of Barack Obama's actual birthplace didn't matter at all to that conversation. What he was saying, the truth behind that, and I'm putting truth in really heavy quotation marks here, this is the truth for those people of white supremacy, that Barack Obama, his background, his ethnicity, disqualified him from leading the United States, and Donald Trump was selling the truth of white supremacy. The fact that it was incorrect, that Barack Obama was born in Hawaii, that didn't matter at all. It was about the truth. And so I think that's a good definition of truthiness, where you have a truth in mind and facts are sort of irrelevant. But I do think there's a corollary, and I think it exists within journalism very strongly, and the left. I call it factiness. And it's just the exact opposite. It's this obsession with facts, oftentimes missing basic truths. And, I really suffered through the Donald Trump campaign and election. It seemed very obvious to me. So anybody who knows me, I was annoying them the entire election because I was saying Donald Trump's obviously going to win. And a lot of people just didn't want to buy that. And I had a lot of my friends are in publishing and in news and journalism, and watching my friends who their job is to describe the world accurately, completely not understand the reality of American life and American politics, and to completely miss his campaign, to completely miss the racism behind it, just to not understand the truth. But boy, we had a lot of facts, right? You could refresh Nate Silver 538 and get charts and facts. Yeah. You could have we had so many facts. We had fact checkers, and we said we have the most, NPR said we have more fact checkers, and NBC's, we now have more fact checkers. And I hear that a lot in conversations at this conference. There's good, credible facts out there. Why don't people care about my facts? I have all the facts. But completely missing some basic truths. How people know, what motivates them, what cultures are like outside of where journalists live. In the United States, that's a really big problem. Journalists live in one spot, and it's a big country. I don't know if that's a similar situation in Italy and other places. But your job is to describe the shape of the world. And it really means getting beyond just the way that journalists think. There's an epistemology that journalists have, and it's actually a radical one. It's one I support, I try to hold, I believe in, I champion. I think more people should have this way of knowing. But we have to understand that it's a radical way of knowing. It challenges many people. the job of the journalist, I think, is to get beyond this idea that we just need to collect facts. There also needs to be the basic underlying truths. And so I think that's a mistake. Those are the two main mistakes that I think people make: truthiness and factiness. And I think identifying the latter I haven't really seen that a whole lot, and I think it would be useful.
I should open to the public, to the audience, if there are questions of any sort. Please just raise a hand, and we still have like 15 minutes, so please. A microphone coming? Oh, yeah, here in front. Thanks.
Thanks for the intellectually satisfying session. I agree with most of the stuff that you said. I mean, all these dichotomies that you are destroying is very helpful. But then I think there is some truth to a new episteme in a Foucauldian way happening now, and that's a shift from two things. One is a shift from text to images, and another one is a shift from the priority of rationality to a shift to a priority of emotions. So if you define enlightenment as a project, that was supposed to prioritize rationality and all that kind of stuff, it didn't mean that rationality was the dominant, form of being at the time. It meant that it was important. But now we are entering an era where rationality and facts do not matter. It doesn't mean that they mattered before, they were dominant before, but at least they had some importance, and that importance is being lost. So I think we can speak about a post-enlightenment and its political, social, economic consequences. What do you think?
I mostly agree. We mostly agree with each other. That's good. And I'm happy my session was the one where the word Foucauldian happened. That's good. I don't buy. I think I've heard from the same person, all this facial recognition and surveillance, like the totality of my life is being recorded and everything is knowable, and at the same time, facts don't matter and we're in a post-truth world. I've heard the same. I think the same person holds those two things in their mind at the same time, which are the exact opposites, right? Facebook's or any tech platform, its entire value is the facts that it's collecting. Facts, I don't think, are going anywhere. I don't think truth is going anywhere. And I do like your point. Images conveying affect. Maybe a paragraph is a good way to convey an idea. It's hard to convey a theory with a set of images. And I think that is interesting. I don't think the image has lost its purchase on truth. A lot of people have said that. We're not, now that we have deep fakes, no one's going to believe images anymore, and it's going to be the epistemic chaos. More people question the Zapruder film than, we had the big shooting in Las Vegas, and a shooter was shooting a crowd, and there's many videos. There's a lot of conspiracy theories about the shooter and his motives. There is no conspiracy theory on did it not happen. We take those videos as truth. Even though any one of those videos is very easily editable today, it's very easy to manipulate videos, it have been nearly impossible for everybody in that crowd from all over the country to edit it in the exact same way. The same technology that makes video and images more falsifiable, digitality, is the same technology that means we all have phones and our cameras in our pockets, meaning that now a news event is being shot from many different angles at the same time, and in some ways is far more believable than that photo that ran on the cover of the New York Times, which is there's been a couple of instances where it turned out the photojournalist edited a photo. There's a famous one where instead of one explosion, there's like three, and it looked more spectacular, because you only saw one image from one angle. Right? And you never kind of see, and during a news event, you always see from, I'm sure the photographers here aren't shooting the other photographers. So all the images look like there's no photographers in the room when there is. And those images are total truth. But if you took a collection of images taken by everybody in the audience, that would be really hard to falsify. You would all have to coordinate that really well. So I really do think there's many new ways in which images, video, even in an era where they're so easily manipulated, will still be about truth. The photos you posted to Instagram still, to you, convey some sense of truth, of who you are, what you're doing. And it may not be accuracy, it may not be exactly right, but it's conveying some sort of truth of how you feel. So I do think we are still in the world of truth, of facts and information. It might be information for whom. Facebook has a whole lot of facts, but if you're reading news on the news feed, you might feel like you don't have a lot of facts. So now they are in an epistemically privileged situation. So maybe the better question is enlightenment for whom, post-truth for whom, who's most vulnerable to misinformation, and who's benefiting and profiting from the continuing of truth and information. And I think that'd be a Foucauldian response too. So.
Other questions? Please, here in front.
Hi. A lot of ideas sort of swimming around in my head right now, but I live and work in the Middle East, where false news, fake news has been around, conspiracy theories also for a long, long time. And it's really disturbing to me to watch the focus on fake news that has emerged as a result of the elections in the United States. And to see how it dominates a conversation into a certain direction, and that could have very negative effects in my part of the world and other parts of the world. And the same with the anti-terrorism, the same with many different agendas. Yeah. And so that's sort of one question is how can we put the fake news or the propaganda, I came to this session because it said propaganda and not fake news. How can we put that into a context of, that is not just Northern European and Western, but is global? That's one thing, especially within the media. And the second thing is more about the companies, because I think we focus a lot on companies here and not enough on governments and their role, and every law in across the Arab region has false news provisions where it's criminal to have false news. So that obviously hasn't worked. Mostly it's the governments that will create false news and propaganda. So, and the second part is like with this sort of gaming out of the AI and the Zuckerberg and data can govern us. I tend to think of this as a trend towards something that I personally call, and will probably get in trouble for saying, techno-authoritarianism. And I think we should be using terminology like that, because I am not represented and can have no decision-making power on Facebook, and it mimics a lot what I see in authoritarian regimes. So I just wonder if you would agree or comment.
Yeah, I mean, I think I really wanted to underscore, and I appreciate the idea of getting away from fake news, talk about propaganda, get away from Zuckerberg is so robotic and is annoying, to let's talk about authoritarianism. Let's talk about digital colonialism. Let's use adult words for an adult situation. And I think the reason why we haven't done it is because we collectively have not come to terms with how we gave so much power to so few people. A few people have an incredible amount of power. That's happened. That's done. I don't mean it's done. I mean, it has happened. And using adult words to talk about this, I think will help us understand that situation. Where do we go from here? And so that's mostly just to agree. I'm just restating what you're saying. And to the point that many of these conversations here, including this one, is extremely Western centric. I have reproduced that problem, so I can't speak to that, and I think it's a good argument for a more diverse group of speakers and conversations. to which I'm not contributing to, right? So that's not for me to like. I feel like it feels hollow to be like, oh yeah, I agree. Like I'm contributing to that problem, so I'm looking for other people answer on that one.
I wasn't really trying to call that out. Just quickly, I wasn't trying to call that out. I really wasn't.
You should,
I was
yeah.
really trying to how can we ask others to remember to contextualize it as it happens, and that fake news maybe isn't this priority that should be driving every conversation that we have. That's kind of more what I was getting at.
Yeah, and that concern really rings a little hollow these ideas that that maybe the government should decide what is true, and like again, coming from like I don't trust the Trump administration to tell me what is true, and that is the difference. That is when it becomes propaganda, right? When it's state sponsored, and at this point, it's like people are still calling Donald Trump a troll. And to me, I know there's a million definitions of trolling. To me, it's when someone is sort of upsetting an established narrative. There's a conversation that's being had, and you're coming in, and you're flipping the table, and you're going to upset it in some way. And people still see Donald Trump that way. He's the president of the United States. He is the conversation. You can't be the president and a troll, by definition, by my definition. We can debate. And so I think, but we still have this view that it's this kind of funny outsider. And, it was, in my country, it was the journalists and the pundits and the people who live in the fact-based world. When Donald Trump announced his campaign, they laughed. You can find a super clip of it on YouTube of just panel after panel on cable news or whoever, just laughing and laughing. And Donald Trump would be up there saying, racist things, and they just couldn't stop laughing. And I think that'll be burned in my brain forever, is when he came around, people whose job it was to understand the political situation saw reality and laughed at it. It wasn't even that they disagreed and they thought he couldn't be president. It was the reality of the world was laughable, and done by people whose job it was to describe the reality of the world. So I do get a little bit. Sometimes I question. I'll just leave it there. I can rant on that forever. So.
There's a very last question. We have 3 minutes. Question? Nothing. Then I'm going for it. What do you think of this delete Facebook movement? Admit it is a movement,
Well, there is this. I've seen a couple of times at this conference.
Does it make sense?
In other places I've been, this idea that journalists have finally taken down Facebook, right? Like, and there's an antagonistic relationship, and journalists, we've done it. And I don't think the delete Facebook movement is really about everyone has woken up to privacy. I think it's people are tired of the app and they want to move to a new one, and you feel kind of cornered into it, and you want an excuse to get mad and do something else. I don't think everyone has come to terms with the nuances of data and privacy. I don't think that's it, because everyone's going to move to a new app. They're probably going to move to Instagram that Facebook owns that has the same data issues, and no one's going to. This is a test, right? If everyone is deleting Facebook because of privacy, they won't move on to Instagram. I think they will move on to Instagram. Therefore, it wasn't about privacy. They want to see more pictures and less, weird articles and advertisements. And I think it's as simple as that. But, let people, if you want to react to an app that isn't making you happy by deleting it, do it. Even if it's the one I work for, go for it. I've heard there's some arguments that you shouldn't delete Facebook, that the only way you can change it is if you stay on. I think that's absolutely ridiculous. The idea that you have a moral obligation to use an app so that you can change their culture from within seems to be an awful precedent. Delete. I think it kind of comes from a bad place. That I have the most. There's this meme of the cosmic brain, and the best take is actually don't delete Facebook. I think that's a bit silly. Let people revolt in the ways that they wish. It's not a real revolt. I think they're moving to an app they like better. An actual revolt would be storming the data centers. go get your data. That's what it would look like. I don't think anyone's proposing that. I wouldn't oppose it, even if it meant the company I work for. So, do that. But, storm the data centers. It's not a hashtag. Yeah.
It's an action, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. I think we're running out of time, so thanks for being here. Thanks to Nathan.
Thank you.